as we grew older, we regretted that we had to come to the boys' college because you missed out the experience with the girls thereafter. When we talk about Lucknow, we always talk about La Martinière. Minus the children, it is just another abandoned palace. On Teacher's Day, a bald teacher, and it was not me, a bald teacher is presented with a very beautifully packed gift, and out from that comes a comb.
We've heard stories of ghost sightings in the building. How much of it is true?
Oh, it's absolutely true. The statues on the top of the building come alive at night. Who am I? I am Indian by political definition. I am Anglo-Indian by communal definition. My mother got exhausted with having to worry about this immigration stuff, that in front of us, she ripped apart all the forms which one had to fill in and said, that's it, we are staying here. Cathedral happens to be the center of Christian worship. My scooter was lifted from Hazratganj on Valentine's Day. बैटरी, अरे भैया हम बात करते रहेंगे तुम्हारी भी बैटरी चेंज हो जाएगी.
Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Batkahi. जब हम लखनऊ की बात करते हैं तो कई नाम होते हैं जो हमारे दिमाग में तुरंत से आते हैं. गलावटी कबाब हो गए, इद्रिस की बिरयानी हो गई, बड़ा इमाम बाड़ा, भूल भुलैया, यूनिवर्सल बुक सेलर्स, गंजिंग और ला मार्टिनियर. और जब हम ला मार्टिनियर की बात करते हैं तो आई थिंक हम सबके दिमाग में एक नाम जरूर आता है, विच इज कार्लाइल मैकफार्लैंड. तो बस आज हमारे साथ मिस्टर कार्लाइल मैकफार्लैंड मौजूद है और उनसे हम बात करेंगे उनकी खुद की जर्नी के बारे में ला मार्टिनियर में, क्योंकि वो वहाँ के सिर्फ alumnus ही नहीं रहे हैं बल्कि वहाँ के एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर भी हैं. सो उन्होंने उसको काफी ज्यादा बदलते हुए देखा है, उन्होंने लखनऊ को भी बदलते हुए देखा है, उनकी खुद की अपनी एक जर्नी है. तो आज बस हम उनसे इन्हीं सब चीजों पे बात करेंगे. वेलकम टू आवर शो सर.
थैंक यू इशिता.
सर, तो टू बिगिन विद, वी हैव हर्ड कि आपकी जो इनिशियल स्कूलिंग हुई है दैट्स फ्रॉम Martinière Girls.
You needn't look very shy about it. Yes, as a matter of fact, it was at Martinière Girls College, which was then called Martinière Girls School, of which I have the happiest childhood memories. The reason for that is that Martinière College, that is where the boys studied, was entirely a boys' institution from class 5 and above. It was built on the typical boarding school format that we have in different parts of the country, where boys who were mature enough to be able to leave home and come and stay within the environs of a boarding school were admitted. As a result, boys were admitted to the girls' school, A, because enrollment in the girls' school was at that time lower, B, because it was a very good system of feeders, of providing students for the boys' college, which had by that time also begun to admit day scholars. My brothers, who were both older than I, studied at the girls' college up to class 4. I only studied up to class 2 because by the time I reached class 2, the provision for education in the college for boys was already available for class 3, and so the transition was kind of natural. As we grew older, we regretted that we had to come to the boys' college because you missed out the experience with the girls thereafter. But when you're that small, it doesn't make a difference as to what gender is, okay? We were just students who enjoyed being with each other. And I'm happy to say that we still maintain friendships and relationships, or at least acquaintanceship, with those whom we interacted with in the girls' college.
Okay, so your journey as an administrator and also as an alumnus. So how have you seen La Martinière evolve over the years?
Well, it's an institution that is now 180 years. When I was in school, it was just about 130 years. I say just about, but that in itself indicates that it was more than a century old. So when an institution has survived a century and now moving towards a second century, little changes here and there really don't make very much of a difference. Unless we don't come in and severely hamper the flow and the ethos of the institution is strong enough and capable enough of being able to absorb any of the changes that might come temporarily, which some might think are not very suitable.
Okay.
In my time as an administrator, it was a great joy bringing back the college to life. When I say bringing back the college to life, I don't mean that it was in any way moribund, but I am talking about the buildings and the campus and the entire sense of fun, the kind of fun which I had when I was a pupil in school as well. In your introductory remarks, you did mention that when we talk about Lucknow, we always talk about La Martinière. As a matter of fact, in the last 10 years, La Martinière has become very much the poster kind of structure for Lucknow and to attract people to Lucknow. And the reason for that is because it just looks so lovely. It just looks so organized. It just looks so pretty. And of course, when you find the children running around in that very pretty environment, I think it makes it look even better, because minus the children, it is just another abandoned palace. But with the children, it is a living monument, and that's the way I think the founder had intended it to be. And for the last 200 years, we have been able to keep that going.
So the students are the ones who put life into the building.
Absolutely. Minus the student body, okay, it would be just another pile of bricks with a coat of paint every now and then.
Okay, so Lucknow has many different schools, not just La Martinière, but La Martinière has its own standard. So what makes La Martinière stand out from every other educational institution that's there in Lucknow?
Well, I think it is an unique institution, not just in Lucknow, but perhaps in the nation. And I'm not boasting about it, but I present before you certain facts. It is a school that is undefined as far as its autonomy and as far as its administration/management goes. We are perhaps the only school in the country which is directly controlled by the court and not by any trust. In fact, our college predates the Indian Trust Act because it was established in 1840, classes started 1845, and I understand the Trust Act is perhaps 1860, but I may be wrong as far as that is concerned. Any change to the basic nature of La Martinière can only be undertaken when the court in Calcutta, which at that time was at Fort William and which was at that time called the Supreme Court of colonial British India, takes a final decision. So I don't think there is any other institution in the country that I know of where you have us as wards of the court, as it were. Okay, so this is a very heartening situation because it means that in the event of there ever being any major trouble as far as land, property, and so on is concerned, there is always recourse to the court, not just as a plaintiff, but actually as a ward of the court, asking the court to look at the way in which the school functions. So that's the first element of uniqueness. The second element of uniqueness is that in the north of the country, this is in fact one of the oldest schools. There are schools older than La Martinière which are in Kolkata, one which is even older than that in Chennai. But La Martinière in this part of the country is indeed unique because of its age. Thirdly, because of its romance and history. And I put the two words together. You have a young French boy, 16 years of age, whose name is Claude Martin. And he runs away, as it were, from his native Lyon in France. His stepmother wags a finger at him and tells him that if he insists on going and joining the French East India Company, he must never return unless he comes back in a carriage, which was a sign of status at that time.
Right.
And you have this romance of him coming to India on board a ship, coming to Pondicherry, then moving to Kolkata over the Bay of Bengal with, of course, a series of years and events in between, changing his profession or adding to his profession by becoming a cartographer, by becoming a surveyor, coming up north, buying off vast fields of land, then becoming an entrepreneur in the indigo trade, coming to Faizabad, which was then the capital of Awadh,
right.
which then was being changed to, the capital was being changed to Lucknow, finding an opportunity to even be an architect of all the fancy buildings that were required for a capital, buying off a huge tract of land called Lakpera, meaning 1 lakh trees, and settling in Lucknow with, of course, a number of difficulties, including the fact that as a foreigner, he was sometimes unwelcome in Awadh. B, as a Frenchman, he was sometimes in a dubious position even with the British, who, the East India Company, of course, which was a very powerful force at that time. So look at the romance even in the establishment of the institution. And then imagine, almost 9 months before he dies, and he died in September 1300, on the 1st of January, 1800, I beg your pardon, on the 1st of January of that particular year, he signs a will which is witnessed by friends and men of influence, leaving the bulk of his estate. Arguably, he was the richest man, European, in India at that time, leaving the bulk of his estate for the establishment of a school for young men. Can you imagine it in today's world, something like this happening?
No.
Okay, it's almost impossible to even dream of. And he just, with the stroke of a pen, signs away this entire property with, of course, giving some idea as to what his overall intentions were. A, it should be an institution for young men to teach the English language and the Christian faith, but we pause there, if they so desire. Now, 200 years ago, 225 years ago, as a matter of fact, for somebody to be as visionary as that, not to push religion down one's throat, but merely to offer it as an option of education, to offer what he felt he had been through and would like to share with others, I think that is really remarkable.
It is indeed. Because that was the time when religion was being imposed on everyone.
Well, arguably, I would concede to what you were saying to a particular extent, because I do admit that the Nawab of Awadh at that time had raised a very strong objection to how in inverted commas, Christian school or a school teaching the Christian faith could exist within his realm without his permission.
Okay.
And it did, in fact, require his permission, which was sought and received, and the school began to flourish because of that.
All right. So how long have you been associated with the La Martinière?
presume since the time I was born, inasmuch as my parents were citizens of Lucknow. The first school I knew was La Martinière, though it was gender specific to the girls. My entire schooling was done at the college. And thereafter, I kept up close association with the college through teachers, friends, events at La Martinière, and so on, till eventually I felt fully qualified as well as achieved the full academic qualifications to be able to lead the college after 27 years of having worked in an affiliated associated college of the University of Lucknow. So it was a homecoming. It was a homecoming which just knocked the Mickey out of me, because it exhausted me, the kind of work which was required, especially in the context of a contrast to doing perhaps 3 or 4 lectures in the day at postgraduate level before that. Therefore, it was a matter of choice. I loved most of it. And of course, being with the children was the greatest delight. You're probably going to ask me what is the difference between teaching at university level and at school level. You can't draw comparison.
Right.
But let me say unequivocally, the actual change, the actual mentoring which was possible with children right from the age of 5 to about 17. That kind of a range of young people growing up and being able to establish not just what they learn, because that teachers do in class, but to give a kind of a blueprint and present a theme of how we want our young men to be. That has really been a wonderful experience.
Okay, so as a teacher, what's your favorite part of teaching?
Always being in the classroom, exciting interest, because interest always has to be excited. Children sometimes are tired, sometimes are bored, sometimes with a mental block, sometimes with the lack of the skills in understanding what is being put across.
Right.
But to be able to create and initiate that interest and that spark in young people is, I think, the most exciting thing about being in school, being in class. You are actually making a difference in lives, sometimes through just a phrase, a word, a glance, or a comment, which you do not really recognize at the time of making it, but which years later, young people, then young men, return and tell you, you made a difference to my life by this element or this statement or this phrase or this appreciation at a particular time. In most cases, I've forgotten it.
Okay.
But let's understand that if you're genuinely interested in children, if you're generally interested in bringing out the best of the children of the human species that have been given to you, these things come naturally. They cannot be inculcated. They come naturally. And I'm blessed with that observation.
Okay. So any specific anecdote which you would like to share with us?
There are too many. And who knows, one day I would have to sit down and actually make a note of them. There are the funny things which perhaps could only happen in our college, where on Teachers' Day, a bald teacher, and it was not me, a bald teacher is presented with a very beautifully packed gift, and out from that comes a comb.
Okay.
You have another teacher who is given multani mitti, all right, for him to be able to look after his skin. So there will always be these little tricks, these little parodies, these little things which, if taken in good fun, become part of the legend of school. And if, of course, there is an adverse reaction to it, be sure that the boys will think of something even more cruel to be able to get back at you.
Okay. Okay, so you've also been an integral part when it came to the restoration of the La Martinière building. So any specific findings, any special findings that you came across while you were, restoring the building, so to speak?
Well, first of all, I am not an archaeologist. And second, the building is not so old. It's about 230 years. So it's not so old that there had to be major restoration done. It was more conservation. And for this, I built on a strong legacy which was established by my predecessor. He was Mr. Elton de Souza, who took it upon himself to start this whole process of conservation by first doing that which was actually required. Strengthening the building, making it waterproof, providing leak-proof roofs for the building, and so on. He then passed on the baton to me, and while we continued with the strengthening of the structure, because an old structure requires maintenance the year round, much of that which is cosmetic and which people notice at first sight became my good fortune to be able to deal with. Did we find things? I became an avid lover of history, an avid lover of art, of archaeology, of all the different things associated with what man builds only through the conservation of La Martinière. When we look at the beautiful, matchless ceilings, I don't think there is any other building in the country that has ceilings with such beautiful bas-relief medallions and different tablets on it, all reflecting the art of the time of Claude Martin, lovingly and very capably restored by local artisans. History comes alive for you. For example, when I was growing up, I did hear at home of Wedgwood china. And all that I knew about Wedgwood china at that time was that it was blue and white, and that it was remarkably costly, and that it was also rather rare. And then when we started scraping away a part of the artistic work on the roof and found these fantastic clay medallions depicting scenes from Greek and Roman mythology, and then going to the internet, incidentally, this was before Google Lens, going to the internet and searching for these stories, which was a little difficult, but not as difficult as perhaps having to go through volumes and volumes of books on that. You learned about Wedgwood. You learned about Uzziah Wedgwood. You learned about his pottery. You learned about the way in which he created this particular shade of blue, which is now known by his name. You learn so much about him and, for example, his role in the human rights movement. It takes you, one thing takes you to another and another and another. You learn about Greek gods and goddesses, the stories which are there, the sacrifices of horses, the massacre of the innocents, stories from the Bible, and so on, all depicted on the roof that we have crossed under thousands of times. But it's when you sit down and actually make a study of it that it all comes alive. And I do hope that that will continue for not just years or decades, but for centuries to come, because it is definitely a part of our collective wealth in this part of the country.
All right. Okay, so when it comes to Martinière and its building, there are various legends associated with it as well. So, for example, we have heard stories of ghost sightings in the building. How much of it is true?
Oh, it's absolutely true.
Okay.
That's what I tell all the children. I have lived alone in the palace, sometimes for 2 or 3 months together, COVID, for example, or even the normal summer vacation, which is about 8 weeks, and never felt or heard a thing. But when a child comes to me and says, "Sir, is so-and-so place haunted?" I say, "Of course it is. You better be careful." And the legend just continues. And children have this remarkable gift of being able to add to what they have heard before. For example, the statues on the top of the building come alive at night. So I'm told. Even in the most drunken stupor, I don't think you would ever see those statues alive. The statues, another generation tells us, were seen dancing together in the night. Yet another group of children swore that they heard anklet bells going from the hospital right up to the oldest building on the estate, and then the sound disappeared. There was also a headless horseman who raced past the dormitory. Now, whether the horseman was without a head or the horse was without a head, or both, I don't know. There is the legend of Claude Martin's horse being buried directly under the Lat, or a memorial column, which is on the estate. So these stories abound. And it would be absolutely terrible to prick that bubble of illusion and allow disillusionment to come into very, very imaginative children who just keep adding to the legend as time goes by.
Okay, so, but didn't you just prick that bubble right now?
I pricked it for you, and I'm absolutely sure that those who are 10 or 12 years of age are not going to watch this program.
Right.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but
No, absolutely fine.
that's the way it is going to be. And by the time they come to their 17s to 20s, they are definitely a little wiser. But then, being Martinière boys, they will never give up the story. They will pass on the story as though it were gospel truth.
Right. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the Anglo-Indian community in Lucknow. So, Lucknow has a very, very vast history, and there are multiple religions and communities that live here. What about the Anglo-Indian community? How have you seen it evolve over the years, and what's it like being an Anglo-Indian living in Lucknow? What was the experience like growing up here?
Well, first of all, I would insist on issuing a caveat over here that I do not see myself identified as an Anglo-Indian full stop. And second, when you talk about the evolution of a community, as you just now asked, I'm not very sure what the opposite of the word evolution is, but what we are talking about actually is the assimilation of a community into mainstream India. This happens in every part of the world, of course, where minority communities, even though sometimes the word minority is not considered a very nice word, but where minority communities have to, for survival, as well as part of natural evolution, social evolution, become a part of the mainstream. And that is the position in which I see myself today. And I think at least one more generation after me is also likely to go through elements that are similar.
Okay.
Let me explain. You mentioned words like Lucknow has multiple religions, communities, and so on, as though these words were synonymous, whereas actually they aren't. Let's just look at it. Who am I? I am first an Indian. I have an Indian passport, Aadhaar card. I pay my taxes. Therefore, I have a PAN. I have a driving license, and all the things that, inverted commas, qualifies me, proves me to be Indian. If I ever go to another part of the world and fall into trouble, I know that my consulate or embassy will be there to help me because I am Indian. Being Anglo-Indian is a fact of birth. All right. Now, please notice the difference. We use the word minority, but then we use the word minority for religious communities. Okay. Today, I could say that I have begun to follow a faith which is not determined by my family or no faith at all. I would still be an Anglo-Indian without that faith, okay, because of natural reasons, there has been a biological and genetic union of a male European with a woman or a female of Indian ancestry some generations ago, which has then continued. Okay. Now, we can talk about this kind of interbreeding, whether it is defined, whether it was assisted, whether it was natural, whether it was a rape, whether it was taking advantage of people. Those are different stories. But the Anglo-Indian part comes from two different races coming together. Third, most Anglo-Indians, 99% of Anglo-Indians, also happen to be Christians. Right? Reason, the European forebears also brought with them the religion that was popular in their part of the world, which was Christianity.
Right.
Just as every Sikh is a Singh, but every Singh is not a Sardar. All right? We have to realize that there is this distinction over here as well. So I am Indian by political definition. I am Anglo-Indian by communal definition, and the communal element here is not religion, but language and race. And I was born into a family that practiced the Christian faith. What I am at the moment, I'm not too sure, okay? But for all intents and purposes, okay, these are the three separate as well as collective elements that make up the Anglo-Indian in me. Okay. To come to the second part of your question, what has been the change in Anglo-India? You must keep in mind that I actually don't belong to this century. I spent 40 years of my life in the last century. All right? And 40 years of my life in the last century was a period of social history that unfortunately has not been recorded either in fiction or through sociological examination of how societies undergo change. I am not equipped with the scientific tools to be able to make very clear statements on this. But what I will say is this, which I have observed in the first 40 years of my life. Let me explain. India became independent in 1947. 14 years later, I was born, which in the history of a nation is just taking your first baby steps. And so I was born into this Indian, Anglo-Indian, Christian kind of tradition, which was definitely all very mixed up. Being Anglo-Indian, since that was your original question, left you with a sense of taking sides. For I am as Indian as the Ganga, on the one hand, because somewhere along the line, there was the matriarchal line, there has been that maternal influence, which is as important as the paternal influence, which makes me also European as far as heritage is concerned. In 1947 and in the years thereafter, as I said, till I was born, there must have been struggle for people to form new identities or adjust identities or assimilate identities, as I referred to earlier. It would be, in inverted commas, disloyal to both sides to say one is better or stronger than the other. Okay? It's completely disloyal. Right? How could I turn my back on a maternal influence which has affected my being maybe 7 generations ago? How could I turn my back on the paternal influence merely because the geographical location in which I am happens to have undergone political change? Right. All right? From colonial India, you come to the wonderful independent India. I repeat, I feel as Indian as the Ganga. But just as the Ganga has so many nuances, it flows through so many places, it assimilates so many cultures, right? It is very similar to the life which I and members of this shrinking, diminishing community also undergo. We saw, in my case, I heard of the number of families that went back to what they called home. Okay. But when they went back to England, obviously, it was never home for them because they had never been born there. It must have been a cruel shock. Mm-hmm. The Anglo-Indian diaspora took so many back to the United Kingdom, many to Australia, which was considered the land of opportunity at that time, some to Canada, some to the United States. And this diaspora found its peak in the 10 years after independence. That is 4 or 5 years before I was born. Okay. Did my parents do the same thing? Well, they did try. I will be honest. Until, and I have this as a vivid memory, my mother got exhausted with having to worry about this immigration stuff, that in front of us, she ripped apart all the forms which one had to fill in and the photographs which one had to send and said, that's it, we are staying here. And I am extremely grateful for that act of anger, which I don't think was just a knee-jerk reaction, but which must have been thought about greatly. Right. Because when my parents themselves were well into their 40s, when I was already 10 or 12 years of age, to start a new life with 3 children in a brand new place, which you're not very happy about doing also, okay, was perhaps not the wisest or the most sensible thing to do. Those Anglo-Indians who migrated did so for the benefit of their children, I presume. And I do hope that those children have turned out nice. When I say nice, that they have the best features of that which is Indian And of course, the advantages of being in a country that their parents chose for them.
Right.
Okay? So, to conclude, Anglo-India is diminishing. Anglo-India is assimilating. We have principals of Anglo-Indian schools who prefer to speak in Hindi than in English, even though English and the propagation of English is in fact the reason why the Anglo-Indian school exists. These oases in different parts of the country, to maintain a particular culture as defined by its language. But change comes. Change comes in dress. You find men in the far more comfortable and climatically adaptable costume of kurta and pajama in the summer, rather than wearing three-piece suits. You find women who wear shalwar kameez or saris, which are far more eye-catching and definitely very, very comfortable, as opposed to short skirts in the middle of winter, right? Or exposure of, unwanted exposure of skin, which might create sort of social difficulties at times. But this assimilation is a two-way effect. For while the Anglo-Indian lady might have taken to the sari or the salwar kameez, you will find the traditional, complete, in inverted commas, Indian young girl, educated from the schools that you and I have been to, wearing the finest of European designs or European fashions, sometimes leaving nothing to the imagination as far as clothing is concerned.
Right.
So you see this kind of interchange, this assimilation, which takes place all the time. It happens in food. All right. So I think Anglo-Indian cuisine is not a distinct cuisine, but it is an identifiable cuisine because of the mixture of spice to everything which is traditionally cooked in traditional ways from the European kitchen. All right? And so that is one more delight to add to the platter of India.
Okay, so you just mentioned Anglo-Indian cuisine. So which food or dish is your favorite one?
I eat everything except kadhi and karela.
Okay.
All right? That they both begin with K might be, there may be something in this, but I will eat anything else, all right, and enjoy every bit of it. Okay, so there's no question of, okay, this is a favorite food or that is a favorite food. Okay, just bring it on.
Okay, so yeah, even I don't like karela, but yes, I do like curry. Okay, so moving on, let's talk a bit about Lucknow as well now. So Lucknow, again, since we've talked about change, so Lucknow also has changed, and since you've been in Lucknow for so many years, so you've seen that change happen in front of your eyes. So पहले अगर हम बात करें, so लोगों का जो time spend करने का एक तरीका होता था, that was very different. People used to go to Ganj to do ganjing. People used to go to Mayfair to watch movies, and they used to go to Universal booksellers, so on and so forth. Now people go to cafes. The cafe culture is evolving. It's there. It's flourishing. People go to malls to watch movies. So a lot has changed over the years. So how have you seen that change, and how have you adapted yourself with the changing times?
First, a more general answer. If you don't adapt to change, you're left behind. Okay? If you say, I insist on going to a movie in a theater, okay, a single screen theater, you'll not see a single movie. All right, and it has been so for the last maybe 40 years. So you just adapt to change. And the changes have, in most part, been very wonderful. Like before, there have always been these flash-in-the-pan moments of entertainment. For example, you have just now mentioned the cafe culture. Yes, it is there. It's very intimate. It's very nice. It's fairly reasonable, right? But notice it is an adaptation of our dhaba culture. When we went to college, when I say we, I mean I went to college. You're so lucky to belong to the cafe generation. We sat over endless cups of tea at the local dhaba and discussed everything, all right, from the hemlines of actresses to the latest in politics to cricket scores and wars in different parts of the world. People in cafes today, young people in cafes today, are doing very much the same thing with even more topics to discuss because of the fantastic revolution that has taken place with reference to technology and information technology in particular. So change has taken place, but this change is based on what we have seen before. We must consider that India is no longer the insular subcontinent that it was. Once again, because of technology. Earlier, it took at least a full year for a music record released in the United States or the United Kingdom. Take, for example, the Beatles, which was a hot favorite when I was growing up. Okay? It took at least a year for actual physical copies of that to be with us, and that too at a great price.
Right.
Today, the moment a new number is released, you can download it or hack it or do whatever it is, but the fact is you are up to date with the rest of the world, just as the rest of the world is up to date with us. The Indian diaspora in Canada, the Indian diaspora in the United Arab Emirates know exactly what is happening in Bollywood, what is happening in Pakistani movies or stage shows, etc., at almost real-time levels. Okay? Why? Because of technology. So the changes which have happened are changes which have been generated by technology and greater access. The fun of being with people, okay, the joy of being with people, well, that remains very much the same, though the system might have changed. I'm not very sure if that answers your question.
It does. Okay, so since we're talking about change again, so the way people spend their time now, that also has changed. So initially, earlier, few years ago, जब हम क्रिसमस पे गंज जाते थे, so we used to go to cathedral. We used to, live in that environment, live in that atmosphere. We used to live for that experience of gunging on Christmas Eve. Now that has changed. What people do now is, वो अभी भी जाएंगे cathedral, but not for that experience, but to make videos. Have you seen that happen, in front of your eyes as well, like with the students that you have taught?
Yes, indeed. And indeed, it cuts across all communities. For example, notice how, I'm sure this must have happened in your family as well, everyone speaks about Holi is not the same as it used to be. Okay? It's
even
very
for me,
different.
actually.
Even for you, all right? We'll say the same thing at Diwali. It's not the same as it used to be. Now, if we take that a step further and ask how has it individually, through an individual's eyes changed, okay, there will be some anecdotes or something to relate which may be of interest. For example, when I was growing up, when I say growing up, say around 14, 15 years of age, okay, it was always a great delight to watch these large tolis, almost exclusively of men, with perhaps a portable harmonium and a dholak, go down the streets singing, wishing just anyone who was passing by, stopping at temples, being blessed, moving around, throwing color. And now when I look back on it, it seems so romantic. Today, everybody is in a sealed car. And either they are absolutely fashionably dressed up with makeup and everything, all right?
In whites.
But definitely you will not find them in a dirty, filthy condition inside the car, because you see, it's going to mess up the car.
Right.
All right. What has happened to that charm of community and community celebration? I'm not very sure. But to hazard a guess, you have 1,000 people living in a housing society. Within that housing society, to meet 1,000 people or even 10% thereof is more than enough. You'd no longer have to go down the streets. But something is missing. Okay? Or shall I say, something has changed. Maybe my grandchildren will not know of the Tolis that went down. And therefore, they will only know that our society had a terrific time. We had a terrific time. There was bhang in the thandai.
There was rain dance.
All right, there was rain dance. All right, or whatever. Okay, so these are some of the changes. You specifically asked about Christmas. When I was growing up, Christmas was exclusively a Christian/Anglo-Indian festival. Neighbors would wait, okay, for the traditional Christmas cake to be sent to their homes, just as we waited and enjoyed receiving gujiyas at Holi or sweets at Diwali. Today, there is no boundary for the celebration of Christmas. You mentioned everyone goes to cathedral. Everyone doesn't go to cathedral. Cathedral happens to be the center of Christian worship. And so, automatically, the social mind is attracted, right, is sort of magnetized and moves towards that particular place.
Right.
All right, where rather than wishing each other, although that also takes place, you would be more interested in selfies or filming, etc., because that technology exists. You are right. It is very, very different. But let us hope that the celebration continues.
Right. True.
All right. When you have killjoys coming and wanting to restrict that celebration only to a particular community, that's not the India which I grew up in, and it's not the India which I envisage. And the same thing is true for all other festivals of the different religions, of the different faiths that we have. Okay? Once again, assimilation, as I said, is a two-way process.
True.
All right? Traditional India has taken on this so-called European religion. Actually, it isn't. It started in the Middle East. All right? But it came via Europe, shall we say, to this part of the country. That's a whole different set of discussion. But we see how it has been assimilated, all right? And it has been assimilated with our typically Indian systems. I saw a lovely photograph on, it was either Facebook or somewhere on the net, which showed a lady, a very traditional follower of Islam, covered in a burqa, holding the hand of a little boy who was dressed as Santa Claus. And I thought that that was so lovely.
It's beautiful.
Right? Because, right, you have this kind of assimilation. And sensitive photographers will from time to time pick up scenes like this. All right, somebody dressed as Krishnji, all right, sitting behind a scooter, all right, of somebody with a very traditional prayer cap on. You again have the assimilation of cultures, all right. So that's the India which I love, okay, that sense of tolerance, that sense of making everything else yours.
That sense of oneness.
That sense of oneness. To move aside slightly from festivals, Valentine's Day was something which I knew about as a child, because it fitted in with the Western culture, of which I am also a partaker. But Valentine's Day was not something that my friends in school knew about. Today, just as the Hazratganj is cordoned off for Christmas and New Year's night, the same thing happens on Valentine's Day. Okay, where has this suddenly come from? Who was this Valentine? Even the Christian community would not be very sure. All right, and there would be various legends. And India has conveniently made it into its own festival by calling it Loving's Day. All right. My scooter was lifted from Hazratganj on Valentine's Day many years ago. And when I went to report it to the Hazratganj Kotwali, they said, before you lodge a report, just see outside, because we have picked up a number of scooters which were impeding traffic and movement of people. And sure enough, my scooter was there. And I said, but like, what did you do this for? He says, oh, you know, aaj wo Loving's Day chal raha hai. Right? So for that reason, there was a big crowd. Okay. But when you think of it, a Valentine should be a man. The word Valentine, the name Valentine is a man's name, not a woman's name. So traditionally, in the Western culture, it is where a lady or a girl has the opportunity to propose to, and that too incognito, to a man whom she is interested in. Today, the men are giving women flowers, women are giving men flowers, all right? Gender roles are going all over the place, and everyone is happy, including families who are wishing each other happy Valentine's Day because it's the day for love. Right? That's India once again. Okay? You may sit back as a social critic and smile at it or be sort of dismissive of it. But this is reality. This is what is happening. And, okay, how very wonderful. Okay? Let it continue so long as there is love, which is actually shown.
True. Okay, sir. So one last question. So you've been surrounded by students, young men, young fellows. So if you talk about today's youth and the youth that you've witnessed maybe 20 years ago, so what's the difference between both the generations?
It's a good question, but I don't restrict it to 20 years. I have been a teacher, formally teaching, for 40 years. Okay, that's probably older than you are. And in 40 years, the enthusiasm of young people, okay, at that particular age has been very much the same. In a word of credit to the children of this generation, they are young people who can be completely honest. We generally very happy to debunk the current generation and they're useless and they're this and they're that. In my time, so and so thing happened. In the last 15 to 20 years, there has not been need for young people to put up a show, to put on a disguise, to wear a mask in relationships that are fairly intimate. For example, the teacher taught, the parent-child. All right? Why? Because they know, they are so informed, not just about rights, okay, because that brings in a scale of sort of competition, right? But they know that they can speak their mind and say what they actually want. It is repressive parenting, that Victorian kind of system, which will lead to depression among young people, suicide bids, and so on, because children are not allowed to speak freely, which their peers or which current society is offering them the chance to do. Second, if we say that, say, in the last 20 years, children have messed up, who messed them up? It is the generation just before that, right. My generation. So if we blame them, okay, that they are no good and this is wrong and that is wrong, then we also have to look at the perpetrators of this. Okay, what were you doing in parenting at that particular time? Next, children of today are so informed. We don't need a general knowledge test anymore in school. Any child who is slightly alive to what is happening around him will know the name of the captain of the Indian cricket team as well as the name of the president of India, which otherwise 20, 25, 30 years ago you had to sit down and learn by heart. You're so informed, and because you are informed, you also know what your rights, privileges, requirements, etc. are. There are, of course, things which may not be very good, but then it happened in the past generation as well. For example, in our bigger cities, to some extent, even in our city, you have references to substance abuse. But did we not have that in the hippie culture of the 1960s and early 70s? Did we not have LSD? Okay. And sadly, at that time, we did not have detox clinics or rehabilitation centers for young people who may have fallen to temptation but had no way of getting out of it. Okay. The vibrancy of young people is as it was before. The methods by which they express it may be different according to the requirement of the times.
Okay. All right, makes sense. Okay, sir. So it was wonderful having you. Thank you so much for joining us. And so this was our conversation with Mr. Carlyle McFarland. And to stay tuned with us for more such conversations, do like, share and subscribe to our channel. And that's all for today. अगले episode में मिलते हैं आपसे. Thank you.
Thank you.